Hey there, lovely people. Welcome back to another Writing Tip Tuesday. I'm Sammi, and I'm a writer who likes to help other writers become better writers. This week, I want to talk to you about your main character again. I did talk to you guys about your main character a little while ago on how to make sure that they are believable, and I will link that video right up here for you. But this week, I want to talk to you about how to choose your main character, because your main character is your reader's portal into the story. They are the person who your reader will dive into and feel the most emotionally connected to, and psychologically, whatever happens to the main character, if they are written well, will feel like it's happening to us. The reader's brain will respond to it in a way that it's like as if the problems that the main character are facing are their own. So that is super important in making sure that your story is effective emotionally. Now, choosing your main character before you write your story can really help to streamline the process and make it easier to make sure that your story is going where it needs to go. And that comes from having your main character's internal conflict guiding where the external conflict is. Because you can have external conflict all day. Any kind of external situation, you can have plot points coming at you from all directions, but not all of them are going to really matter in your story. They're not all going to affect the reader in the same way as the external conflicts that are brought onto the story because of the choices that your main character makes based on their internal conflict. So let's break all of that down a little bit. So the internal conflict is the part that your reader connects with. It's the part that teaches us something, whether we realize that it is or not. Because of how we are as humans, we don't always know what other people are thinking, and giving the insight into why a character is making the choices that they are making, what emotional triggers are causing them to think what they think and take the steps that they are taking is what really hooks a reader into your story. It's the kind of thing that makes a story unputdownable. It's when the main character's internal conflict and emotional responses are addictive to your reader. They are something that we cannot get enough of because we know subconsciously that there aren't very many opportunities for us to learn why other people make the decisions that they make. So what do you need in a main character that is going to be emotionally driving your story like this? What do they require to have to be effectively functional in giving that emotional connection to your readers? They need something that directly connects with your story's what if. If your story's concept is basically like, what if two characters fall in love, but they aren't allowed to? Their families hate each other, and if they fall in love, they're gonna get disowned by their family, and there's a whole bunch of other conflicts, and people might die. This is Romeo and Juliet. That's the example. So let's say the what if is the external premise of your story. So if you're thinking about your story in a general concept, it's like, what if two people weren't allowed to fall in love, but then they did? That's a question. That's something that we can ask. Your main character is going to need to be somebody who is going to directly interact with that concept. So that's somebody who is the first daughter, the favorite child of the father of a specific family who is in charge of a political scene of some sort in their realm. And the love interest is the first son of their opposing family force, and they fell in love. I'm trying to go with Romeo and Juliet, but it's been a minute since I've read the original, so it may take on a different kind of take here. So you want to make sure that the person that you choose to be your main character, or the person that you create to be your main character, is somebody who's going to directly interact with that general external conflict, the main conflict that your story is going through. So that could be as simple as taking, I want to write a story about what happens when a horse is perfect except for something specific happen. Like something specific about this horse makes them difficult. And then you think about the people that could be like, oh, we've got a girl who grew up around horses. She's always had all of this stuff. She would interact with the horse. She would know how to interact with the horse and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, that could work. She could be a perfectly fine example of a main character, but would it be more interesting if somebody who didn't know anything about horses was able to tame this horse that was perfect and nobody else could do it? And the reason why they could tame it is because they went through a similar trauma as what happened to this horse that made this horse not respond to people the way that they should. Something like that. Depending on what the goal is for your story, your main character could be either of them, and both of them could work perfectly fine. It's just who has the most interesting connection there? And how does their connection to that external conflict lead to them making decisions emotionally for their internal conflict that guide towards progressing the external conflict? That can be super complicated to think about, but it's pretty much if your character has a history of working with horses, right? And they're trying to tame this horse that has whatever trauma that this horse has that makes it not as easy to tame. They're gonna go at it from all of the normal perspectives of trying to tame a horse. They're gonna do all the things that they know a lot of things, all of this kinds of stuff. They're gonna keep doing the right thing. When they make their choices, they're based off of their experiences and their knowledge of what they're doing. And they're going to expect certain outcomes based on the things that they're doing because of their history. Now, if you have a person who has a similar trauma to the horse's trauma, and that's the person who knows nothing about horses who is able to tame them, rather than a girl who knows a lot about horses being able to tame a horse. If that is your main character and they discover something, they're gonna go at it from whatever perspective they came with, whatever history they have, and they're gonna address the situation from that point of view. They're gonna address it with their emotional perspective first, not necessarily a knowledge first experience. And neither of these characters are wrong for telling that particular story. It just depends on how you want to tell it. Do you want to tell a story that's saying practical knowledge is super useful and you can use it to apply to a lot of things? Do you want to say that an emotional connection to another living creature is something that is powerful and important to have? It really depends on what you want your story to say. Whoever's history is going to lead that story into what you want it to be is the person that you should choose there, the person that you should create. So even if your person who has a similar trauma has a history with horses, there's nothing wrong with that, so long as you make sure that their decisions are coming from a perspective that leads your story where you want it to go. And that segues right into your main character needs to have a history. Their story can't start on page 1 of your book. They need to have things that have happened long before that have created the person that they are today. How do they make their decisions? Why do they make their decisions? What were they taught as a child that has just become ingrained in them? What do they know that other people might not know? And what do they experience that other people may not experience? All of these things are going to create a person who will impact your story. A lot of stories have a lesson, even if it's something that is very minimal, something very small that not many people would pick up on, but a lot of the really, really great stories out there have something that the characters learn. So starting off knowing what you want your message to be, what you want that lesson your character is going to learn to be, you can give them a reason to believe the exact opposite. You can give them something that in their history they have learned this is the truth, even though it's not the truth of the world. It's a lesson that they need to learn through the conflicts that will present itself, and that misbelief presents as your character's want versus need, which I do have a video on, so I will link that up here. Your character's want versus need leads to their internal conflict. Their decisions based on their want versus need then influence what kind of external conflicts will come along with them. Now you may be thinking, but wait, Sammi, my book has so many characters. It's an ensemble cast. They all have the same value. They are doing the same amount of work. They're doing the same heavy lifting. All of them are important. You're probably right. All of your characters are important. They definitely should all be treated the same way and given the same amount of emotional development. They should all have their own history. But if you want to streamline your process for writing the story and make sure that it is really easy to know why the external conflict is happening and not just assume every external plot point that happens to all of your characters is an important one, because that can lead to a lot of things just sort of needing to be cut later on because they don't hold any emotional value or any genuine necessity to your story. Making only one of your main characters into your protagonist can make that way easier for you to do. So how do you choose who to be your story's protagonist? You can start by asking some questions. Whose story has the highest potential for growth? Whose point A to point B is the vastest? Whose point A to point B is the smallest? Keep those in mind. Take a look at what kind of value they are bringing to the story and what kind of emotional journey they may be going on. Whose story has the most complicated interaction with the external conflict in terms of their internal conflict? Whose long-held misbelief, whose want versus need are directly combating the most or the most interestingly with that external conflict? And that's an entirely subjective question. While one of your characters may seem like they are the most interestingly combating with the external conflict to me, they may not be the one who is doing so for you. That is totally fine. It's just to help your writing process to figure out who that main character is directly. You can also ask whose story is responding the quickest to your story's inciting incident. Who has the fastest reaction? Who has the strongest reaction? Take those into consideration. Whose story seems like it will have the strongest guiding force for the external conflict to get where you need it to go. And while there's nothing against not having a main character or a protagonist to your story, if you have multiple main characters, it can make the writing process easier and quicker and make it more effective the first time around. Because when you have multiple main characters, it can be really easy to get shiny object syndrome for certain external conflict plot points because they can just come in and you don't have to motivate them yourself. You can just create external conflicts. The ideas for external conflicts will just keep coming to you over and over and over and over, and you'll just have all of these amazing ideas for external conflicts, but they won't be emotionally motivated. And because psychologically the emotion is what we key into, it might not be as interesting to readers. Now, there are some stories, I got into a whole debate with my partner about this. There is something to be said about epics having multiple main characters. I don't read or watch many epics, and I think I have to take his word for it on this one because I don't ever get interested in them. I don't like them, and I think there's a chance that it may be from the fact that there is not a strong emotional through line, and that is the part that I latch onto in storytelling. He latches onto the external things, the plot of the story, what is going on and why it's happening. I latch onto why the characters are doing what they're doing and why they feel how they feel. So that could just be a difference in our taste, but because I don't read epics, I have to take his word for it that perhaps with many interweaving stories, like in an epic format, there need to be multiple main characters being given the same amount of treatment. And that just says to me that there is more work for that particular type of story. You should be making sure that everything every one of your characters do is influenced by their internal conflict, which in turn affects the external conflicts, the external plot points that come their way. So if you have 5 characters and all of them are a main character and they have the same equal importance, they should all be making choices based off of their internal conflict. Their internal conflict shouldn't influence other people's internal conflicts. And I know that can be kind of confusing, so I think for beginner writers, it may be easier just to pick one and see where the story goes when you follow one character's internal conflicts and leave the other's internal conflicts affecting solely them rather than the external conflict of the story. But it would be something to play around with if you are more advanced and have an interest in writing an epic. You are going to streamline the process of writing a story by making sure everything that happens is influenced by an emotional why. The character's mental perspective, emotional response is causing this. So anytime you want an external situation to happen, ask yourself, why would my character's internal conflict make this happen? What would my character's misbelief lead them to think would be the best option? And why would that not be the best option? And how does that not being the best option lead to this external plot point? If you can't connect it all the way back to their internal conflict, it probably doesn't have any meaning towards your story. The way you can think about it is you choose your main character because of who they are and what their history is and what they believe. What they believe is not correct, and because they believe what they believe is true, they will act upon it as if it is a fact. Their belief will lead them to make decisions that will impact the external things around them, and those external things around them will gradually teach them that their belief is wrong. And when you have a main character that influences the story that way, their influence will be seen on other characters. And by fleshing out all of your other characters, they will have an influence on how your main character is perceived. And that can be something similar to foil characters as well, but not quite the same all the time. Everything will generally come in and bounce off of each other because you have a main character who is directly influencing how the external conflict happens because of their emotional connection to the reader. But that is all I've got for you today. I know it's a little bit confusing. Leave any of your questions down below, anything that didn't make complete sense to you, and I would be happy to get back to you on that. If you don't want to miss any more content like this, I put out a new writing tip video every Tuesday and a story study every Saturday, so you can hit that subscribe button and the notification bell next to it, and I will see you guys on Saturday for a story study. If you like this video or you learned something from it, hit that like button. It'll really help me out and show YouTube that maybe more people would like this video. But I will see you guys on Saturday.